Hello, what's crack-a-lacking, my young but awesome friends? I know, cheesy, but hey, I'm sitting in a room by myself. I got to do something to keep myself entertained. So today is Tuesday, September 29th, and if you are watching this, one of two things has happened. Well, three. One of three things has happened. One, you missed class today, and you want to know what we talked about because, well, this class is awesome. Two, I confused you when I talked about something, and so you want to look up and see if I did a better job explaining it with no people in front of me. Or three, something terrible has happened. You missed my face, and you wanted to see me one more time. I know, it's sad. Anyway, so basically, here's the gist of today. We did some reminders at the beginning. We did a little bit of trivia. People wowed me with their knowledge of video games today. That was our topic. If you want the questions from the day, just chat me. I'll be more than happy to go through them with you. I'll video call you. We can do trivia. It'd be awesome. But mainly we went through some slides, and that took up a little bit of our time. And then we had a little bit of work time to work on our assignment. So I'm going to go into presentation mode and go through the stuff with you for today. And just a big reminder that if you have questions, I want to help you, and I sit here all afternoon waiting to help you, but you don't call me. So please, if you need help, make sure you ask, okay? That's what I'm here for. Okay, so I'm going to go into present mode, and I'm going to disappear, and this is definitely how kind of my day feels, except I don't feel like the guy kicking the ball. I feel like the guy playing goalie. Like every once in a while, I feel like things are going good. Oh, look, he missed a shot. Boom, right in my face. That's me today. I don't know. I feel like I've been hitting the head like 20 times today, but that's okay because, hey, it's Tuesday, and Tuesdays are very Tuesday-y. Anyway, your reminders. Don't forget, if you owe me late work, I am still taking that. I will take all of the stuff. So if you owe me Closing the Frontier, which is due last Thursday, get that in soon because I would be more than happy to give you some feedback on that and get that into the gradebook for you. The second thing is I am going to be sending out those emails today. Again, today is Tuesday the 29th. I'm going to be sending out emails today to you and your family or guardians to let them know and how things are going so far. We're at about the halfway point in this quarter semester of American history. And I want to make sure that you understand where you stand and what you can still do. Okay. Along that line, don't forget that if you have an assignment with some feedback and you want to go through and make some corrections or additions to that work, that is more than awesome. And then resubmit it so I can take a look at it for you again. Don't forget the assignment that we gave out in classroom is due on Thursday by midnight. That's called the U.S. versus the Sioux tribe. It's actually two little things you have to do. People are whining at me already about it, but hey, it is what it is. Today, our topics that we're going to talk about is we're going to look at how the Transcontinental Railroad was built. And we're going to talk about how a lot of early Latinos lost their land in the southwestern part of the country. And then we're going to start looking at how tribes started to lose their land, like what was going on. Okay. So let's say that one more time. Okay. All right. So we're going to start off with talking about how transportation changes the West, and in particular, the Transcontinental Railroad. So before I click on any of the words that are going to pop out on the right side of the screen, I want to talk a little bit about what's going on the left side of the screen. We're going to get my mouse pointer up here. There we go. All right. So obviously, we're going to build a Transcontinental Railroad on this slide. Doesn't that sound glorious? Okay. Now, the thing I need you guys to understand is if you look at this, where I've done this giant blue arrow, because wow, I'm pretty awesome at Google Slides, is this is what they build in the 1860s. Now, if you're looking at this going, but wait a minute, it doesn't say half transcontinental or semi-transcontinental, it says transcontinental. That's because there were already all kinds of railroads over here, especially in the northwestern part of the country. Up here, there were thousands of miles of existing track. And so what they did is they took an already existing train line that went to about right there, and then they built another piece in the middle, and they hooked it all together where you could get on the train in New York City, and you could go all the way out to Sacramento, California. And then eventually they finished it and went all the way to the Pacific Ocean, where you could go sea to sea and dip your toes in both of our favorite East and West oceans. The building of this was not easy, and so we had to bring in a number of people from around the world to do it. In particular, Chinese immigrants were used to build the red side of things because at the time they decided that it was cheaper to bring people from China. I'd have to take my mouse pointer way off the screen, which I can't. Easier to get them to California than it was to get people across the country. It was actually cheaper. The other thing I wanted to show you guys is this is what the trains that they went on looked like. Now, obviously, they would have passenger cars back here for, I don't know, a long chunk of time. They had a coal car because they burned coal for their fuel. And on the front, they had this really cool addition called a cow catcher because trains didn't stop like that. They didn't stop instantly. And so they had to have a way to make sure that if there was a buffalo or a cow on the track, that it didn't wreck the train. And so they put this kind of pyramid-y shaped piece of iron on the front, and they had a buffalo on the track. They just hit it, and it either flew off to the side or it got split in half if it was a smaller animal, and then they just kept going safely down the way. Okay, so a little gross, but kind of cool engineering. I'm not saying I want those on my car, but I mean, hey, get people out of my way. Anyway, that was terrible. I shouldn't have said that out loud. All right, so we're going to kind of go through this two things at a time, okay? So in 1862, the United States Congress approved the Pacific Railway Act, which basically provided the plan for building the railroad and the money for building the railroad, and it was going to be super duper duper expensive to get this done. And so they came to a decision that this railroad would be an important part of making America the great country that they wanted it to be. And they also thought that this would help us fulfill that goal of manifest destiny, that we are supposed to spread out from coast to coast because God said so. Now, when they passed this, they were in the middle, well, not in the middle, but they were toward the beginning of the Civil War still. And so we had a lot really going on in the country. And so they knew that the early part of this would be a lot of planning. And so the U.S. government and the railroad companies that they hired, the Central Pacific, who was going to build the red part of the track, and the Union Pacific, who would build the blue, and they would meet in the middle someplace, they didn't know where in the beginning, hired a man named Theodore Judah. Now, Theodore Judah was seen as a little bit different at that time period in history. He was a wild thinker. He had a lot of crazy ideas about railroads and what they could do. But they thought that he was the perfect guy to go out and plot the course that they would follow. See, there isn't like a river or a road or even a wagon train out here. And they had to find the best way to get through the Rocky Mountains too. And so they hired Judah and they paid him, I don't know, it was basically like the equivalent of a few $1 million in today's money to go out and plot the course. And so Judah hired a group of people to come with him, and they started in Nebraska, and they basically walked a path. In some places they followed rivers, like a lot of this is following small rivers. And then when they got to the mountains, they had to find the best path to get through the mountains. And they staked this all out using railroad stakes. Judah and his men did this all in wagons and on horseback and on foot, and staked out and mapped the path that the two companies would take. They then gave the Central Pacific a map of where they could build and the Union Pacific a map of where they could build, and suggested that they would end somewhere in this circular area. They didn't really know who was going to get where. They told them to build fast, and the faster they built, the more money they would make. The reason that they were going to make a bunch of money is because this is not going to be cheap. The government was already pitching out a ton of money on the Civil War, but they also agreed to pay not only money for the track, but also land. And so they'd agreed to pay the companies by the mile that they built. Now, if you look at that, you would assume, again, looking over here on this map, the blue company would make way more money than the red company because the blue line is just longer. I mean, trust me, it is. If you don't believe me, you can measure it if you want to, but you don't have to because I'm telling you it's longer. But then they made an addition saying that the more difficult the building was, the more money they got per mile. So you made more money for building in the mountains than you did for, like, let's say, building across Nebraska. And so the two companies made a pretty similar amount of money. In back then money, the government paid out roughly $111 million. Now, I did a little bit of math today. I used an awesome inflation calculator that I found online that told me that $111 million back then is basically equal to something cost $3.3 billion now. Okay. And so obviously that ain't cheap, my friends, but the railroad company still thought they weren't being paid enough. The government couldn't possibly afford more money. So what they did is they decided to give the railroad companies free land. So for every mile of track they put down, they got 5 miles of land surrounding the track. The owner of the railroad could then do whatever he or she, in this case he, wanted to do with the land. And they sold a lot of it, and then they built towns along the tracks. And so the people that owned the Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroad became some of the richest people in the country at that time. Okay. Now, once the building got started in 1863, things weren't always very smooth. I put up there, the construction began in 1863, but then I put 1865 in parentheses because that's really when things really, really got going. It took them a while to get all the supplies and all the workers where they needed them to be, but there was another problem. The Native American tribes that lived in the West were very against this thing being built. They realized that not only would the sound possibly scare away game animals like buffalo, but also this meant that more white people were going to show up. So in 1865, when the Civil War ends, a number of military troops are shipped out west to help protect the workers. The work is finally completed in 1869. So if you look at it, I guess you could say it took 6 years to build, but I would probably be more likely to say it took 4 years to build because of the 1865 thing. It was built by a number of immigrants. If you worked on this blue side and you were an immigrant, you were probably an Irish immigrant. Those people had gotten to New York City and then were brought out here to work on the railroad. If you worked on the red part of the track, you were probably a Chinese immigrant brought from China. The immigrants were paid terribly. Irish immigrants made more money than the other immigrants because they were white. The Chinese immigrants were paid poorly. The freedmen who eventually came to work on the track were also paid very badly. There were also a number of white Civil War veterans who, after the war, their jobs either didn't exist, or if you were in the South, your plantation wasn't really there anymore. And so those veterans came out and worked on the tracks. It was really dangerous work. I mean, obviously building a railroad track across Nebraska probably isn't that bad. I mean, it's pretty flat. It would be like building a railroad track to Waterloo, I guess, maybe. But when you got into the mountains, things got pretty dangerous. And you had two mountain ranges, the Sierra Nevada, which are right about there, and the Rockies, which are right in this ballpark, okay? And building through those areas is dangerous because you were either going to have to go around the side of a mountain, blast through the mountain, and also deal with weather phenomena like big piles of snow, which could have avalanches. The average worker made about $30 a month. That's right, my friends, not a day, not an hour, $30 a month. I did the math on this one again. That's about $460 a month, which makes that roughly $5,000 a year. That's bad. I know a lot of you guys don't have jobs, and so you might not understand it, but $5,000 a year is not good. Okay, that is not good. It's not, yeah. They didn't have insurance. If someone died on the job, their family basically got a letter that said, hey, Chris died. Sorry about that. And that was it. Okay. To compound the danger, they often had to blast through areas. They had to make tunnels through the mountains and things like that. And they didn't have dynamite available or any kind of cool lasers. Freaking lasers. And so instead they blasted with barrels of black powder. And toward the end, they used liquid nitroglycerin. All right, to try to blast through the mountains. Those things are pretty unpredictable. And then when you get halfway through a mountain in a cave that you've blasted, everything can cave in on you. So it was super dangerous work. Lots of people died. And when you consider how much they got paid, it doesn't really seem worth it. When things finally got finished in 1869, the two lines met up at right where my dot is right there. It's right there. It's right there. That's Promontory, Utah. They had a last spike ceremony where they pulled two trains. I'm making hand motions like you can see me. They pulled two trains, Cowcatcher, that's the metal-y thing here, to Cowcatcher, and they drove in a gold-plated railroad spike. Now, they pulled that out of the ground, and that's in a museum someplace, and they put in a real spike, and then they took a ceremonial picture. And so the photographer had all of the workers get in the picture, except the Chinese immigrants and the black workers and any Latino people that worked on it, because they only wanted white people in the picture. That's kind of, yeah, I guess, wow, not good. Hashtag racism. That sucks. Okay. And when the railroad was completed, you could then buy a ticket and get on a train in New York and actually get all the way across the country. And so it really did open the West. It made Manifest Destiny a more realistic and safer prospect for the white people of the East. Now, that being said, not everybody instantly jumped on a train and moved west. Some people had very comfortable lives in the East. A lot of you guys pointed out in Closing the Frontier that people lived in cities, and there weren't really cities in the West, and they had these nice cushy houses and jobs and businesses in the East, and maybe they didn't want to go to the West, and that's true. But the train definitely changes things, and with the train comes conflict. And one of those conflicts was with the Latino or Mexican people that lived in the southwestern part of the country. Quick recap of something from 8th grade Mr. Place history. My friends, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, and California haven't always been part of the United States. They used to be part of Mexico. Now, Texas broke away on its own and then became part of the United States, but we did not obtain the rest of those places or all of the rest of those places until the 1840s when we fought a war against Mexico, the Mexican-American War. We were victorious as part of the treaty of that war, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Wow, why do I remember that? We were given and bought some territory from Mexico. Now, when we bought that territory, we did not ask the people that were already living there to leave. They became part of the United States and they became automatic U.S. citizens. All right. So when the train started to bring more people west, conflict was inevitable. Inevitable means it's gonna happen. Like Thanos, I am inevitable. And then I would say, I am Iron Seep. Okay. And then I would snap my fingers and I would have tacos. But anyway, conflict is going to be inevitable. As more white people show up, they start looking for land because land was the American dream, man. I want to win the lottery and have an endless supply of tacos and be able to travel. People back then wanted land so they could farm. Farming is hard. I don't know why that would be anybody's dream. You guys don't want to be farmers. I'm not making fun of you. That is a great goal, but God, that is hard work. Anyway, Latinos lost their land on, I said, a legal technicality because the way that we prove we own land in American society is you have a piece of paper called a deed. If your family rents an apartment or you have a condo, you have a lease. Latino people didn't have that piece of paper filed with the American government. And so white people were able to come in, go to government buildings, and buy land that people had already owned for years. And if I bought your land, that also meant I got your house and I got your cattle and I got your stuff. And you got kicked out of your land all because you didn't have a fancy United States government piece of paper that says you own the land. Once the Latino people were kicked off their land, they were subjected to a ridiculous amount of racism. I guess we would say it was very similar to what was going on in the southern part of the country to the freedmen. A lot of southwestern states instituted things that were very similar to the black codes called brown codes, laws that discriminated against Latino people and made their lives very difficult. They were given extremely low pay for jobs. They were paid half to a third of what white people were paid for doing the same thing. In the West, if you owned land, you were able to vote. And so a lot of the Latino people weren't able to vote until the 15th Amendment was passed. And so so they lost a lot of power because they couldn't hold power positions because they couldn't vote. And segregation became a thing. Just like in the American South with the Jim Crow laws, segregation became a norm in the West, and there were whites only areas and then areas for all Latino people that lived there. This obviously still has an impact on life in the Southwest today because a lot of cities are still segregated, not by law, but because that's kind of how it's been for the last 100 or so years. And also you still see a lower pay rate for people who are of Latino descent at a lot of businesses. That's systemic racism rearing its ugly head from, 130, 50 years ago. All right. And so white people started to take over that land. Then there's the more famous conflicts that happen, the conflicts with the native tribes. Now I'm going to point something out really quick. If you look at this map up here, I'm encircling this map right here. I hope you guys can see it. The areas that are brown, yellowy, tanny, orangey, all the way over to here, those are lands that were held by native tribes from 1784 to 1819, almost the entire country. Now, if you look as time goes on, here's the years. That area starts to get smaller and smaller to the west. This map right here would be a map of when the Transcontinental Railroad was finished. This is about 11 years after it's finished. This is all the lands that they have left. This is roughly now. These are the reservation lands in the west. So as you can see, tribal lands got manifest destinied. Okay. The tribal nations lost most of their land and now have these small reservations. Well, if you look at this, you're like, wow, that one's really big. That's Navajo. They don't have electricity or running water on most of that. So don't think that that's the greatest setup ever. Hundreds of tribes lived west of the Mississippi River prior to the Transcontinental Railroad. Some of the big tribes would be like the Navajo, the different Pueblo tribes, the Sioux, the Crow, the Blackfoot, the Cheyenne, the Nez Perce. There were a lot of tribes that lived out there. They had different lifestyles and different languages and different ways that they got food. Very unique cultures, very cool cultures. I wish we had more time and we could be in person so I could teach you about some of these tribes and what they ate and their religious ceremonies and all those things, but COVID, there you go. Now they had lived on that land for centuries, maybe thousands of years in peace. Now, as white people started to move west, there really weren't very high conflict rates. There weren't that many problems because there weren't that many white people. And so the native tribes didn't see them as a threat. As a matter of fact, a lot of the tribes helped the white settlers that first showed up. They showed them how to hunt the buffalo and how to farm and how to use the different parts of animals and basically how to make life in the West work. I mean, honestly, Utah wasn't an easy place to live back in the day. Nebraska wasn't an easy place to live back, and it probably still isn't. I mean, it's Nebraska. Okay. But then two things happen. Chugga chugga choo choo, here comes the railroad, and more white people start coming. Well, the more people you add into an area, the higher a chance there is for conflict. Think about it. If you're in your bedroom by yourself, there's probably a 0% chance of conflict. But if I put 100 people in your bedroom, there's probably going to be a bit of an argument about something. The other thing that happens is somebody takes a shovel and puts it in the ground, and ding, they hit a rock, and the rock is shiny and it's heavy because it's gold. And when one person finds gold, more people show up with shovels and hammers and pickaxes, and because they want to find gold and get rich. Well, that's a problem because more and more and more people flood west trying to get rich quick and try to get land. And that's going to cause problems with the tribes. And so tomorrow, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on what happens to 3 tribes in particular. I feel really bad trying to do this in one class period, but again, COVID. We're going to talk about the Cheyenne. That's the Cheyenne. That's Cheyenne. We're going to talk about them because they tried to surrender, but then got attacked and then ended up on reservations. We're going to talk about the Sioux. Sioux is Sioux, not Sayuwaks. They tried to fight. They tried to put up a fight with the United States Army and actually did really, really well, led by some people that you guys have probably heard of named Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. But then eventually they got moved to reservations. And then we'll talk about the Nez Perce, a tribe that you probably have never heard of. They actually tried to leave the United States, and we wouldn't even let them do that. And they got thrown on reservations. So those are going to be our 3 focal tribes because I kind of think that they give us a good example of what happened to the different tribes of the West. Again, if you have any questions about anything we talked about today, if you are confuzzled or behind in homework and need help, that is what I am here for. That's why they give me the big teacher bucks and my summers off. Again, I'm here to help. Please reach out. All right, if you have questions about the notes, questions about the homework, questions about what the best place is to get a really, really, really cool note card, I can help you. Bye-bye.